End of the day. You open your banking app. The screen lights up, just like every other time. Nothing unusual happens. No urgent notifications. No large transaction has just appeared. Just a new deduction. A small one. Not the kind of number that makes someone stop and look twice. A familiar bill. A fee that arrives right on time. A number that somewhere else, for someone else, might just pass by and disappear. But for you, in that exact moment, it changes the color of the rest of your day. You don't see it as an expense. You see it as a touch. A very light impact, but one that goes straight inside. Because the issue was never just that amount of money. The issue is that it appears exactly when your account has no space left, no surplus, no buffer, nothing standing between that small number and the feeling of being pushed into a corner, no distance. And that is what the system hides very carefully. The same world, the same store, the same bill, the same number appearing on the screen. But for each person, its meaning is completely different. For one person, it's just a slightly inconvenient expense. For another, it's something that needs a bit of rearranging. For someone else, it barely leaves any feeling at all. The difference was never in the number itself. It lies in the position you stand in behind that number. It lies in the level of savings you have. It lies in how much distance exists between a small disruption and the forced reaction that follows. That is what this video is really about. This is not a story about saving money in the usual way. Not a few tips to cut expenses, not a list of financial habits to try at the beginning of the month and forget after a few weeks. This is a story about how savings change their function, not just increase, but change their nature as you move through each layer of the system. At the lowest point, savings are just a very thin layer of protection against disruption. Then they become breathing room. Then they become time. Then they become the right to wait. The right to choose. The right not to say yes immediately to unfavorable terms. And at higher levels, they no longer resemble saving in the way most people think about it. They become the foundation of access, of allocation, of a very quiet form of power that only reveals itself when you stand close enough to the system to see how it actually operates. Because savings are not just a number you hold on to. They are your position in the financial hierarchy. They determine how quickly you must react, how much pressure you must accept, and how much right you have to delay a decision until the conditions become better. And at the first level, what is missing is not just money. What is missing is the buffer, the space between an event and your reaction. Level 1, zero buffer. At this level, you're not really managing money. You're managing the timing of the next impact. You look at your payment schedule the way others look at a weather forecast, not to plan long term, but to guess where the next problem will come from. An auto renewal, a bill that shifts by a day, a cost that seems small but appears at the wrong time. Anything can become a problem, not because it is too large, but because you don't have enough distance to absorb it. When there's no buffer, every decision is pulled tightly into the present. You don't ask what is better in the long run. You ask what helps you get through this week. You don't choose between a good option and a bad one. You choose between pain now and pain slightly delayed. That is why life at this level always carries a very specific kind of suffocation. There isn't always a major crisis. Sometimes from the outside, everything still looks normal. You still go to work, still pay bills, still live like everyone else. But underneath, your entire financial structure has no shock absorption. A small deviation goes straight into your nerves. A small inconvenience quickly becomes real pressure. A small fee is enough to make you see the rest of the month differently. At this level, savings do not yet exist as an asset. They are not a tool, not a choice, not confidence. What is missing is not just cash. What is missing is delay. Delay to think before reacting. Delay so that a small disruption does not instantly become a bad decision. Delay so that you don't have to live in a state of being forced forward by the present, step by step. And when the first small amount of savings appears, it does not create freedom, but it begins to create something far more important: a very small distance between you and panic. Level 2, first separation. At this level, there is no dramatic leap, no number large enough to impress, no feeling that everything is fine now. There is only a very small change, but a different one. For the first time, a portion of your money does not disappear immediately after it appears. It is not pulled into bills, not scattered into recurring expenses, not dragged away by rushed decisions. It stays. Not much, not stable. Sometimes it even makes you slightly uncomfortable when you look at it. Because at this stage, saving does not feel like accumulation. It feels like you are holding on to something that you used to always let slip away. You begin to notice a new experience. Not every expense has to go through a credit card. Not every situation forces you to choose the fastest option, even if it costs more. The distance you gain is still very thin. A small disruption can erase it instantly. That is the limit of this level. Savings exist, but they're not strong enough to protect you. They're like a thin layer of glass, letting you see a different way of living, but not yet allowing you to truly live in it. And because of that, the feeling at this level is always very distinct. You are no longer completely cornered like before, but not yet stable enough to feel safe. You begin to hesitate before spending, not because you have more options, but because you don't want to lose what has just appeared. And that thing is not money. It is proof. Proof that you can retain a portion of your resources instead of letting the system drain it the moment it passes through your account. This is a shift in identity, not in balance. But if it stops there, it won't last, because at this level, a poorly timed expense is still enough to wipe out the entire progress. An unstable month can still pull you back to the starting point. So the question is no longer, can you keep money or not? The question is, can that act of keeping become a fixed part of your system? And when savings are no longer an accidental number, but become a repeated behavior, intentional, disciplined, everything begins to change more clearly. Level 3, basic stability. At this level, you begin to have something that did not exist before. Not wealth, but the ability to not react immediately. Small disruptions are no longer strong enough to derail your entire month. An unexpected expense no longer triggers a chain of bad decisions afterward. You don't have to patch things immediately. You don't have to compensate with more expensive choices later. And the biggest change is not in the amount of money. It is in how you think. You begin to realize you are no longer forced to choose the worst option just because there is no alternative. You can pause a little longer, compare, refuse, or simply wait. That is what savings at this level truly buy. Not profit, not growth, but breathing room. Enough space so that you are no longer being pushed from one decision to another. But there is still a limit. At this level, you are still mostly in defense. Savings help you absorb risk, but they do not yet help you. Structure your cash flow with intention. You are less pressured, but not yet in control. And as pressure begins to ease, a different question starts to appear. No longer, how do I get through this month? But where should that surplus be placed? Level 4, organized capital. This is when savings stop being a single pool of money. You no longer see everything as one number. You begin to divide it. One part, not to be touched. One part, to grow. One part, to wait for opportunities. One part, to handle things that haven't happened yet, but inevitably will. Each part has its own role, its own limits, its own reason to exist. And for the first time, you are not just reacting to money. You are designing it. You decide in advance where money will go, before the world has a chance to pull it in its own direction. That is the difference. Money no longer just flows through you. It begins to move along paths you set. The feeling at this level is no longer relief. It is clarity. You see things more clearly. You understand the relationships between parts. You understand how if one part changes, the entire structure will respond. But here, another limit appears. Everything you are building is still within a personal scope. It is a good system, but it is still a layer of protection. And when savings reach a certain scale, the external system begins to notice. Level 5, access threshold. There is no clear moment that marks the beginning of this level. No announcement, no visible milestone. No one tells you that you are now standing on a different layer. It's just a few things start to shift. You send an email and receive a faster response than usual. You schedule a meeting, and availability appears sooner than expected. You ask about a financial option, and the answer you receive is no longer just standard offerings. At first, these changes are hard to notice. They are not big enough to impress immediately, not clear enough to name. They appear sporadically, unevenly, without drama. But if you pay attention long enough, you begin to see a pattern. Faster response times, softer terms, greater flexibility, and most importantly, options that did not exist before begin to appear. Not because you suddenly became smarter, not because you discovered some hidden secret others don't know, and not because the system suddenly became fair, but because at this level, savings are no longer just protection. They become a condition of entry. You are not just buying products. You are being invited into structures where the products themselves are designed differently. Some opportunities are not publicly advertised. Some terms do not apply equally to everyone. Some conversations only begin when you are standing in the right position. And that is when you realize something slightly uncomfortable. The system does not treat everyone the same way. It is tiered, quietly, without declaration, without explanation, but very clearly, if you are close enough to feel it. At this level, savings begin to buy access, not flashy privilege, not something loud or easily visible, but access in the sense that you step into spaces you didn't even know existed before. You begin to see doors without signs, options that don't appear on the public interface, better terms that are not shown to everyone at the same time. And with that comes a new limitation. As options increase, complexity increases with them. Not everything that opens up benefits you. Not every offer is designed in your favor. More access does not necessarily mean you are closer to freedom. At this level, you are no longer just facing the risk of not having money. You begin to face a different kind of risk. The risk of too many options, too many structures, too many ways for your money to be guided into certain places. And a new question begins to emerge. No longer, how do I keep my money, but who is directing your money? And where is it being directed? What structures are you being led into? And do you truly understand them? Or are you just stepping forward because a door has opened in front of you? Level 6, allocation awareness. At this level, the way you see money changes completely. You no longer see savings as a pool of accumulated assets. You no longer see your portfolio as a list of separate items sitting next to each other on a screen. You begin to see everything as a system of allocation. Money is not just where it sits. It is in what structure it sits within. With what level of liquidity, under what tax conditions, attached to what kind of rights, and serving what purpose within the entire picture. You no longer ask, how much do I have? You ask, what is each part actually doing? Which part is protecting you? Which part is growing? Which part keeps you ready for an opportunity that hasn't appeared yet? Which part helps you optimize things you never even considered before? This is when savings truly become the foundation of decision-making. Not spending decisions, but flow decisions. You begin to understand that two people with the same amount of money can still occupy completely different positions within the system, simply because they allocate it differently. One person may hold assets but remain vulnerable. Another may have the same scale, but more options, more delay, more control. And along with that awareness, a distance begins to form. You start thinking about money in a way that most people around you no longer fully share. Conversations about money begin to feel shallow compared to what you now see. Common advice starts to reveal hidden costs you didn't notice before. Decisions considered reasonable by the majority now appear as short-term reactions wrapped in normal-looking behavior. The feeling at this level is no longer excitement. It is a subtle separation. You see more clearly, but you also stand further away. You understand more, but it is not always easy to explain what you are seeing to others. And then you begin to realize something very important. Money does not just grow when you earn more. It grows or disappears depending on how you place it within the system, where it sits, what mechanism it is tied to, what conditions bind it, and what logic it serves. When you begin to control that, your influence starts to extend beyond your personal life. Not loudly, not visibly, but very real. Level 7. Influence through optionality. At this level, savings no longer just make you feel safe. They make you harder to pressure. That is the biggest difference. You no longer have to accept every condition just because you have no alternative. You no longer have to stay in an environment just because you have no way out. You no longer have to decide immediately just because time is working against you. You can wait. And that ability to wait changes your entire position. You can reject an offer you would have accepted before. You can wait for a better opportunity instead of grabbing the first one that appears. You can walk away from a bad situation without collapsing your entire financial structure. This is a form of influence that is very difficult to see. You don't control others. You don't give orders. You don't need to appear stronger than anyone. You simply are no longer easily cornered. And in a system where most people must react quickly, must say yes early, must accept conditions while they are still unfavorable. Not having to do that is already a very large advantage. Savings at this level buy optionality, and optionality creates leverage. Whoever can wait can choose better. Whoever is not in a hurry pays less for urgency. Whoever truly has a way out enters every negotiation from a different position. But there is still a limit. This is still mostly defensive power. You can avoid bad outcomes. You can choose better ones. You can keep yourself from being pulled into unfavorable structures. But you are not yet designing the rules of the game. You are still moving within the structure. You read it better, you use it better. You are less pressured by it. But you are not creating it. And when savings become large enough to not only protect you, not only give you options, but also give you the ability to shape flows at a larger scale, everything changes in an entirely different way. Level 8, structural power. At this level, savings are no longer the center of the story. They are still there, still the foundation, still an essential part, but they are no longer the thing you track every day. Nor are they the thing that directly determines how you live. What matters more now is position. You are no longer standing inside the system merely to protect yourself from it. You begin standing closer to the places where the system is shaped. Not on the surface, not in the part people can easily see, but at a deeper layer, where terms are written, where financial structures are designed, where capital flows are decided to move in a certain direction before the rest of the market has time to react. At the earlier levels, you learned how to protect money. Then you learned how to allocate it. Then you learned how to use your position to gain better choices. But at this level, you begin to see another layer. Money is no longer just managed. It is directed. It is no longer only about where you place your own money. It is about participating in decisions where the money of many other people is also being placed. You are no longer just someone reacting to the market. You stand closer to where the market is created. And that is the biggest change, not in the amount of money, but in the distance between you and the center of the system. The feeling at this level is not what people usually imagine. There is not much excitement, no sense of having arrived, no simple glow of victory that people often attach to the highest tier. It is quieter, wider, and somewhat colder. Because when you look closely enough, you begin to see one thing very clearly. The system does not operate on absolute fairness. It operates on structure, on incentive, on the way flows of benefit are designed to move in a certain direction. And at this level, you are no longer standing entirely on the side that is being acted upon. You begin to stand in a place that can act back. Not always publicly, not always visible from the outside, but very real in the way conditions are created, in the way opportunities are opened, in the way certain flows are prioritized over others. But this is also the final limit. You are no longer pressured the way you once were, no longer forced to react quickly the way you once were, no longer forced to choose under pressure the way you once were. But you are also no longer standing in a simple world. You see the entire system operating. And you understand that every decision exists inside a network far more complex than what it appears to be on the surface. Every set of terms is tied to interests. Every structure creates people who benefit more than others. Every door that opens also closes, in some way, for those who remain outside. That is why the highest level is not having enough money to stop. It is standing close enough to where the conditions of the game are set. And from here, one thing begins to become clearer than ever before. Savings were never the destination. They were only the first door. Final inversion, the real power of savings. Most people look at savings in a very simple way. They think of them as protection, as the thing that helps them worry less, as a goal to reach, before thinking about anything larger. And to some extent, that is true. But if you look back across this entire journey, you will see that there is something deeper. Savings do not just help you avoid risk. They change the way you respond to risk. At the lowest level, you have no choice. Whatever happens, you must react immediately. At the next levels, you can slow down a little. You can think. You can consider. You can choose. Then gradually, you can wait. Not because you enjoy waiting, not because you have become more passive, but because you can. And that ability changes your entire position within the system. You are no longer being pulled along by the current. You begin choosing when to enter and when to stay outside. You are no longer forced to accept current conditions simply because the present is the only thing within your reach. You can refuse and wait for a better set of conditions. You are no longer just holding money. You are holding time, holding distance, holding the right not to react immediately. And from there, you step into layers that once seemed not to exist for you. Access, allocation, influence, structure, savings were never just money. They are the simplest form of power. Not power to control others, not power to display status, not power to stand above someone else, but power to not be forced. And when you have enough distance not to be forced, you begin to see the system more clearly, not as someone trying to survive inside it, but as someone standing far enough away to understand how it actually works. Quiet philosophical closing. Somewhere, there is someone looking at their account at the end of the day. A small number, almost insignificant. An amount left over that many people would not even notice. And they think savings are something that will come later. When income is higher, when work is more stable, when life is less chaotic, when everything finally falls into the right time. But there is something they have not yet seen. Every small amount of savings does not just change the number. It changes position. Not immediately, not loudly, not clearly enough for the whole world to notice, but enough to create a very small distance between them and pressure. And from that small distance, something else begins to form. Not wealth, at least not yet, but the ability to see the system before the system forces them to react to it. Savings do not just accumulate money, they accumulate position. And position determines how the world acts upon you.